The crowd gasped. My foot twisted on the stage's edge. My back lurched, and I hit the floor with a thud that echoed louder than the DJ's bass. Glasses clinked. Someone dropped a fork. My cheeks stung from the carpet burn, and my elbows scraped along the wooden step. The taste of copper filled my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. My vision blurred for a moment, stars dancing at the edges as I tried to process what had just happened. The designer suit I'd spent 3 months saving for was now wrinkled and stained with champagne from someone's spilled glass. I could feel eyes on me from every corner of the ballroom. 200 pairs of eyes, some filled with shock, others with barely concealed amusement. The orchestra had stopped playing mid-note, leaving an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I heard someone whisper, "Did she really just push her own son?" Another voice responded, "The Wrens always were dramatic." Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. I heard my mother's voice echo through the gold-lit ballroom. "You're an embarrassment to this family, Mason. Get off the stage." Laughter. At first, awkward chuckles. Then, full-throated laughs. From guests in suits and glittering gowns. From my sister's college friends. Even from people I didn't know, people who'd probably never worked a day in their life. The laughter felt like needles piercing my skin. I recognized some of the faces: Mrs. Henderson from the country club, who'd always looked down her nose at me. The Rothschild, who'd made their fortune in oil and never let anyone forget it. Even some of Chelsea's bridesmaids, women I'd known since high school, were covering their mouths trying to stifle their giggles. But what hurt most was seeing my mother's business associates joining in. These were people who'd sat in boardrooms with her, who respected her iron will and sharp mind. Now they were laughing at her son being humiliated, as if it were some kind of entertainment between courses. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the heat crawling up my neck. I looked up and met my mother's eyes. Thomasina Wren, the great real estate tycoon of Cincinnati. Silver-haired, suit perfectly tailored, still holding her champagne flute like this was just another day in paradise. Her expression was cold, calculating, the same look she wore when closing a $1 million deal. Behind her, I could see the wedding photographer still snapping pictures. This moment of my humiliation would be captured forever, probably ending up in some family album that future generations would flip through. The thought made my stomach churn. I whispered, "Because I wouldn't sell my apartment?" "It's a shoebox, Mason. You'd rather keep your independence than give your sister a proper start to her marriage?" Shameful. My heart thudded in my ears. I stood brushing off my suit. A shoebox? I wanted to scream. My apartment might be small, but I'd worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years to afford it. Every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen decoration, represented months of saving and sacrifice. It was mine, the first thing in my life that truly belonged to me, that wasn't tied to the Wren family name or fortune. But more than that, it was my sanctuary. The place where I'd spent countless nights working on business plans, making phone calls to potential clients, and building something from nothing. The walls held the echoes of every victory and defeat in my journey to independence. My sister's proper start apparently required my sacrifice, but what about my start? What about the years I'd spent trying to prove myself worthy of their respect? The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted me to sell my home to fund a wedding at a venue I owned, though they didn't know it yet. My sister, Chelsea, didn't even look at me. She stood with her new husband, Silas, dolled up in a custom black tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. His smile never faltered, neither did hers. They looked like porcelain dolls, perfect and untouchable, playing their parts in this elaborate performance. I remembered when Chelsea and I were kids, how we used to build blanket forts and promise we'd always stick together. Now she couldn't even meet my eyes as our mother publicly eviscerated me. Success had changed her, or maybe it had just revealed who she really was underneath all those childhood promises. And then my father, David, leaned into the mic and said with a syrupy voice, "Let's get back to the speeches, shall we?" As if I had just been shoved like trash in front of 200 guests. As if I didn't exist. I stepped down from the stage with a calm face and fire in my chest. They didn't know. Not a single one of them knew the truth about this place, this lavish, grand, chandelier-drenched venue they were all standing in. The place where champagne flowed like water, and the chandeliers cost 6 figures each. Every detail of this ballroom told a story of my vision and determination. The hand-carved moldings that I'd personally supervised. The imported Italian marble that I'd negotiated for months to get at the right price. The sound system that had been calibrated to perfection so that even a whisper from the stage could be heard in the back row. I'd spent 2 years renovating this place, working alongside contractors during the day and handling the business side at night. My hands still bore faint scars from the early days when I couldn't afford to hire enough workers and had to pitch in with the manual labor myself. I'd painted walls, installed fixtures, and even spent one memorable weekend unclogging pipes in the basement. The guests admiring the architecture, complimenting the ambience, taking selfies in front of the grand staircase, they were experiencing the fruit of my labor, my vision, my sleepless nights. And here they were, laughing at me as if I were some failure who couldn't contribute anything meaningful to my sister's special day. The delicious irony was that every bite of food they ate, every sip of wine they enjoyed, every moment of beauty they experienced in this space, it was all possible because of me. Not because of my mother's money or my father's connections, but because of my own blood, sweat, and dreams made manifest. They were laughing inside my building, and I was done being quiet. I didn't leave the hall. I walked straight to the back where the venue manager stood, Carlos. He looked up from his tablet, his eyes wide. "Mr. Wren? Are you?" I raised a finger. "Bring me the mic. Now." People were halfway through their lobster risotto when Carlos walked onto the stage and handed me the wireless mic. Carlos had been with me since the beginning. He'd been the first person I'd hired when I was just a dreamer with a business plan and more determination than capital. He believed in my vision when banks wouldn't give me loans, when my family thought I was throwing my life away, when everyone else saw me as just another rich kid playing entrepreneur. I could see the concern in his eyes, but also something else, respect. He knew what this place meant to me, knew the sacrifices I'd made to build it. If anyone understood the weight of this moment, it was Carlos. I stepped into the spotlight, standing exactly where I had fallen minutes earlier. The same people who laughed stared at me with curiosity or boredom. Some were still chewing, others had paused mid-conversation to see what the embarrassment had to say. The microphone felt heavy in my hand, weighted with the power to change everything. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, but my voice, when it came, was steady as steel. I smiled. Some of you might not know me well. I'm Mason Wren. Son of Thomasina and David Wren. Brother of Chelsea Wren. Apparently, the embarrassment of the family. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One old woman let out a chuckle and took a sip of a scotch. I turned slightly toward my family's table. I was asked to sell my apartment to fund this wedding. I refused. Not because I don't care, but because I already contributed more than you'll ever know. I paused, then raised my voice. Because ladies and gentlemen, this building you're standing in, this venue, this breathtaking hall that's been featured in Cincy Bridal Monthly and Architect Digest. I turned to the crowd. It's mine. I own it. This is my venue. You could hear a fork drop. The silence was so complete I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. 200 faces stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to dawning recognition. I watched as the truth sank in, saw the moment when guests began to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. Some pulled out their phones, probably Googling my name and the venue to verify my claim. Others looked around with new eyes, seeing the space differently now that they knew who was responsible for its creation. Mrs. Henderson's jaw had literally dropped. The Rothschild were whispering furiously to each other. A few of the younger guests were already typing frantically on their phones. This would be all over social media within minutes. But the faces that mattered most were at the family table. I looked directly at my mother, whose jaw had slackened. And from now on, I'd like you all to please finish your meals quickly. Because as of 10 minutes from now, your free booking is over. Gasps. People looked at each other, confused. My father stood, his face going red. You're bluffing, he spat. You're being dramatic again. I held up a contract from my briefcase. This is the rental agreement. Signed not by my mother, but by me. And under my company's policies, any event that includes harassment of the venue owner is subject to immediate termination. Security guard stepped in. Calm, professional. My people. Carlos returned to my side. Should we escort the disruptive guests out, sir? I nodded. My mother stood, face pale. You wouldn't dare. I walked off the stage and stood right in front of her. I just did. The hush that followed was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. Not even the chandeliers dared to tremble. My mother's face had lost all color. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. David clutched his designer briefcase like it could shield him from humiliation. And Chelsea? She just stared at me like I'd grown horns. Silas, bless his perfect lashes, dropped his fork. The guests were now whispering in every corner of the ballroom. The whispers weren't about Chelsea or her $40,000 gown. They were about me. Mason. The invisible son. The quiet one. The guy who didn't follow the family line. Who'd refused the big corporate position Thomasina had dangled like bait years ago. Because I'd wanted something of my own and I built it brick by brick, client by client while they laughed behind my back. Now, they were standing inside it. I took a calm breath. Everyone is free to finish their meals in peace, those who don't think I'm an embarrassment anyway. A few people actually clapped. I turned and walked toward the side exit, my dress shoes echoing like war drums. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I felt free. Alive. I had exposed them not with cruelty, but with truth. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for years, the weight of their disapproval, their dismissal, their constant undermining, had suddenly lifted. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I could breathe freely. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer the disappointing son begging for scraps of approval. I was the owner of the building they were standing in, the architect of the evening they were enjoying. The feeling was intoxicating. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I had finally shown them who I really was. All those years of small comments, passive-aggressive remarks, and outright dismissals, they had all been building to this moment. But just as I reached the door, I heard a voice behind me. Mason, wait. It was Aunt Joan. My mom's older sister. A woman that always called a burnout behind closed doors. But she'd always been kind to me. She caught up to me just outside the ballroom, beneath the marble archway lit in warm amber. That took guts. I swallowed hard. You think I went too far? Joan had always been the black sheep of the family, the one who'd chosen art over business, who'd traveled the world instead of climbing corporate ladders. My mother had always spoken of her with a mixture of pity and condescension, but Joan had something my parents never did, genuine warmth and the ability to see people for who they really were. She studied my face in the amber light, her artist's eyes taking in details that others missed. There was no judgment in her expression, no shock or disapproval. If anything, she looked proud. She chuckled. Mason, they pushed you. Literally. And you didn't scream or throw anything. You reminded them whose name was on the deed. You know what your problem has always been? She continued, stepping closer. You've been too respectful, too patient. You've spent years trying to earn something that should have been freely given, their respect and recognition. Tonight, you stopped asking for it and started demanding it. Her words hit deeper than I expected. She was right. I had spent years being the dutiful son, the one who never caused waves, who accepted their criticism and tried to prove himself worthy of their approval. But approval given grudgingly isn't worth having. That's not petty. That's power. That was the first time I realized. I wasn't ashamed. They were. By the next morning, the story had spread through our family circles like wildfire. My cousin Oliver called at 6:13 a.m., laughing so hard, he could barely breathe. Dude, did you really kick them out of the reception? My dad said Silas's mom had to pay the vendors herself. Your mom left her Rolex on the table. The calls kept coming throughout the morning. Distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly reaching out, some to congratulate me, others fishing for details they could share at their own social gatherings. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages, most of them containing variations of I can't believe you actually did that and you're either crazy or brilliant. What surprised me most were the messages from people who'd been at the wedding, guests who'd witnessed the whole thing firsthand. Several thanked me for the most memorable wedding entertainment they'd ever seen. Others shared their own stories of family dynamics and feeling invisible or undervalued. One message particularly stood out. It was from a young woman who said watching me stand up for myself had inspired her to finally quit the job where her boss constantly belittled her. But the most interesting calls came from people in the industry. Word had spread quickly through Cincinnati's event planning community, and several vendors who'd worked the wedding were calling to express their support. Apparently, they'd all had their own run-ins with difficult clients over the years, and seeing someone finally take a stand had resonated with them. I smiled but didn't say much. Let them talk. What mattered more? My inbox. Overflowing. Subject. We'd love to feature your venue in our next cover story. Subject. Booking inquiry saw what happened last night and we're obsessed. Subject. You're the boss now. Can we talk partnerships? Every magazine, every vendor, every local influencer in Cincinnati suddenly knew who I was. Not just Thomasina Wren's son. I was the man who built a venue from scratch, hosted the most expensive wedding of the year, and dropped the truth like a mic. By noon, I'd been contacted by 3 news outlets, but not a word from my parents. Until 7:02 p.m., a knock on the glass door of my apartment. I opened it to find Chelsea, wearing jeans and a hoodie. No husband. No smug smile. She looked different. Can I come in? I hesitated. You didn't stand up for me yesterday. She looked down. I know. I was scared. That made me pause. She stepped inside, silent for a moment. Look, Mason, I'm sorry. What happened was awful. I didn't know Mom was going to do that. I didn't know how deep it all ran. You laughed. I did, she admitted, voice small. But not because I thought it was funny, because I panicked. I didn't know what to do. For a moment, I saw the scared little sister behind the tailored gowns. She continued, Silas, he told me after we left that he never wants to see my parents again. He saw who they really are. We both did. I guess it took you standing up to them for us to see it. You know what the worst part was? Chelsea said, sinking into my couch. Watching you get pushed and not doing anything. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that Mom was just stressed about the wedding, that you'd understand. But Silas. He looked at me afterward and asked how I could just stand there while my brother was being humiliated. She wiped her eyes, and I realized she was crying. I've been so caught up in trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect success story that I forgot how to be a decent human being. How to be your sister. Her words hung in the air between us. I could see that she was genuinely remorseful, but part of me was still raw from years of feeling invisible in my own family. It was going to take more than one conversation to rebuild what had been broken. The thing is, Chelsea continued, I always admired what you were doing. Building something from scratch, being independent. But I was too proud to say it, too caught up in Mom and Dad's version of success to recognize that what you were doing was actually more impressive than anything the rest of us had accomplished. I crossed my arms. So now what? She looked up. I want to start fresh. I want you in my life. And, if you're okay with it, I want to invest in your business. I blinked. What? She smiled faintly. Silas and I talked. We want to put our wedding gift money into your venue expansion, if you'll have us. I said nothing for a moment. Then, slowly, I smiled. 2 days after the wedding debacle, I sat in my office above the ballroom, blinds half drawn, sipping lukewarm coffee, and watching sunlight cut across the marble floors of my lobby. My inbox kept pinging brides, vendors, and curious media people wanting my side of the story. But there was one thing I hadn't seen yet. My mother. Not a text. Not an email. Not a word. Until I received a call from my building's front desk. Mr. Wren? There's a Thomasina and David Wren here to see you. They say it's urgent. My first instinct? Hang up. But then something inside me settled. No shaking. No nerves. Just a quiet calm. Send them up. When they walked into my office, I didn't offer them a seat. My mother wore a gray blazer over a cashmere sweater, looking more like a senator than a mom. David followed closely behind, his dress shoes clicking with every step, his mouth curved in a smile that didn't touch his eyes. She spoke first. The office felt smaller with them in it, as if their presence was sucking all the air out of the room. I noticed my mother's eyes scanning the space, taking in the awards on the wall, the architectural plans spread across my desk, the photographs of successful events I'd hosted. For the first time, she was seeing evidence of what I'd built, really seeing it. My father looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his wedding ring and avoiding eye contact. He'd always been the softer of the two parents, more likely to follow my mother's lead than to stand up for what was right. But even he seemed to understand the gravity of what they'd done. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken resentments and disappointments. I could see them both struggling with how to begin, how to acknowledge the magnitude of their mistake without losing face entirely. Mason. We came to talk. Not to fight. I leaned back, arms folded. Funny. You weren't as diplomatic when you shoved me off a stage. David winced looking away. Mom cleared her throat. I was wrong about a lot of things. I stared. You humiliated me. You didn't just reject my help, you mocked it. You called me an embarrassment in front of 200 people. She nodded slowly. I know. Silence. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folder. She placed it on my desk. I've transferred 30% of the Wren Group shares to your name. My jaw tightened. Why? Because, she said slowly, it took what happened at that wedding for me to realize I've been blind. You didn't just build something, Mason. You outgrew us. You surpassed us. David spoke for the first time, voice softer than I'd ever heard. We were wrong, Mason, about everything. We thought if you didn't do it our way, it wasn't the right way. But you proved us wrong. They looked tired. Not just physically but emotionally stripped. And for once, they weren't looking down at me. They were looking up. I didn't take the shares. Not that day. Instead, I said, I don't want a piece of the family empire out of guilt. If I'm going to take anything from you, it'll be because I deserve it, not because you're trying to wash off your shame. Mom lowered her eyes. Then tell me what we can do. You can apologize publicly. David stiffened. What do you mean? I mean, go to every guest from that wedding, every client, every vendor, every one of your little charity friends, and tell them you were wrong. Tell them your son isn't an embarrassment. Tell them he owns the venue and he built it from scratch while you were too busy counting your zeros. She looked like she'd swallowed nails, but she nodded. 3 days later, Thomasina and David Wren released a statement on their social media platforms and the local business journal. It read, "At our daughter's wedding, we said and did things that do not reflect who we want to be as people or as parents. Our son, Mason Wren, is a force of nature. He built something extraordinary, and we are proud of him. We failed to see it, but we see it now. To anyone who witnessed what happened, we ask for your understanding, and more importantly, your forgiveness on behalf of a son who deserves none of the disrespect he was given." After that, the tide turned even more. My inbox tripled. I got an offer to host a nationally televised wedding show segment in my venue. An upscale chain of hotels offered to buy my concept and brand it nationwide. But I didn't say yes. Not yet. Instead, I spent the following weeks building something better, a second location with Chelsea and Silas as my business partners, not because of money, but because they believed in me. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was seen. I wasn't just a son. I was the one they all stood on, literally, the foundation beneath their $1 million wedding. And they never even looked down long enough to notice until I made them. 2 weeks later, the second venue was nearly finalized. Smaller, cozier, tucked into a riverside district in Louisville. I walked through the site with Chelsea and Silas, the sun pouring through tall windows as dust hung like gold in the air. "This'll be your new crown jewel," Chelsea said, smiling. I nodded, distracted. Something had been nagging me for days. A strange message from the building's previous owner had landed in my inbox the night before. "Check the ledger behind the front wall panel. It belonged to your grandfather." My grandfather? I barely remembered him. He passed when I was 6. My mom rarely spoke of him, but curiosity got the best of me. That night, after the team left, I stayed back and found the loose panel in the foyer wall. Inside was a wooden box. I opened it and found a crumbling leather notebook, its pages filled with drawings, notes, and ownership papers. It wasn't just a coincidence. This venue used to belong to my grandfather. He'd owned it decades ago, run events here before my mother moved the family business upscale, and buried the history with it. The next morning, I stood in front of my parents. "You knew Grandpa ran events in Louisville?" Thomasina froze. "Where did you hear that?" I tossed the ledger on the table. "From his own hand." David's lips parted. "That place, it was supposed to be sold." I laughed bitter. "No. It was taken. Rewritten in history like he never mattered." My mother looked away. "He was the first to build something real before either of you, and you erased him." I didn't yell. I didn't fight. Instead, I renamed the venue Everett Hall after my grandfather. And on opening day, I stood on the small stage, my hand on the same wood beam he once touched to the men they tried to silence, and the men who refused. 3 months later, Everett Hall had a waitlist stretching into next year. Couples from across the state came to tour it, drawn not just by its charm, but by the story, the real story. A grandson honoring the legacy of a forgotten patriarch. A man who stood on his own after being pushed aside. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I stood on the steps with Chelsea and Silas beside me. Carlos, my loyal manager from the original venue, smiled from the crowd. And just beyond them, my parents. They didn't say a word, but they were there. And this time, they weren't in front. They were in the back row, watching, listening, and that was enough. Weeks passed. Business boomed. Then one Sunday morning, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. Old-fashioned. From my mother, Mason. "I've spent most of my life trying to mold others into my version of success. I see now that I overlooked what true strength looks like. Not loud, not boastful, quiet, relentless. Like you, like your grandfather. I'm sorry it took so long for me to see you. But I do now. And I'm proud. Mom." I didn't cry. I didn't run to reply. Instead, I tucked the letter into the same wooden box where my grandfather's ledger now lived. It didn't fix everything, but it mattered. Months later, a wedding was held at Everett Hall, a small, heartfelt ceremony. The groom wore his grandfather's suit. The bride cried during her vows. Afterward, they pulled me aside. "You don't know what your story meant to us," the groom said. "I was going to give up on my dream until I read about you. You reminded me that it's okay to stand alone." That was it. That was the moment. Not the public apology. Not the headlines. Not even the growth of the business. But this quiet moment of impact was the real reward. I didn't need revenge. I had something better. Legacy. And that stage, I never stood on it to be seen again because now I owned every room I walked into.